Hello and welcome back to our podcast, Ayahuasca Assisted Therapy. My name is Nina Itzel and I'm here today with Greg Shanken. And I'm so happy to have this conversation. We were trying to set this up for a while, and always nice to meet, a fellow traveler on the plant medicine path. And he's in Colorado, and that's where he's doing his good work. And I think you are like a unique person that you have feet in both worlds, because you have quite a, your company, a technological company, a computer. You will talk about it if you want. And then you have, this other path with the plants and all that. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. Great to be here, Nina.
And we just start with our usual question, because I think it's important, when people just get to know somebody, to hear their personal story. And it's always so good to learn from each other that way, because I think it's almost like, a teaching, a teaching lesson in there. So if you want to share a little bit about your personal journey, and how did you, come to the plant medicine world, and how did it affect your life personally?
Yes, thank you. So my journey obviously started before I was born and when I was born, but in terms of how it brought me to this point, and really why we connected and sitting here today, started about 2 years ago, when I realized that my life was stagnating in many ways. I'm blessed to have a soulmate of a wife and 2 beautiful children, and I live in Colorado, and a business, and so many things to be thankful for and grateful for. And I never lost sight of that, but I just felt like I wasn't living my truth and living with passion. And I kind of sat with that for a while and realized that it fell into that age-old cliche, the definition of insanity, doing the same things over and over and expecting different results. And that's what was happening. Lack of change in results. I was seeking, a quantum leap, not necessarily magic, but something different. However, at the same time, I was recognizing that many of the things that I was trying, such as the law of attraction, for example, or hypnosis, or different modalities and health and wellness strategies, some of which are very proven, weren't having the effect that I wanted them to have on me. So same thing, definition of insanity. But that led to me realizing what I'll speak more about later in my story, part of my core wounding, which is this notion of there's something wrong with me. Because if hypnosis is working for my friend to help her stop biting her nails, which actually was something I was dealing with and tried hypnosis for, but it didn't help me stopping biting my nails. So, it frustrating on 2 levels. Why isn't that working for me? And then, well, what's wrong with me? So I decided to go back into therapy. I had been in and out of therapy throughout my adult life. And as not even a side note, but an important note, my father happens to be a psychiatrist. My mother is a psychologist. They're still alive. I have a wonderful relationship with them. But I remember growing up, people would say, wow, your parents are therapists. You must be really effed up. And I'd say, no, like I'm so lucky. And I was so lucky in so many ways, but I can see now, and I'll probably touch on that more as well, how some of that tied to my core wounding and need for healing. And so I went back into therapy, and I remember one of the first sessions, the therapist said, well, I was sharing something, and he said, well, where do you feel this in your body? And I said, I don't know what you're talking about. What do you mean feel in your body? I'm upset, I'm depressed. And that's really my big challenge, depression. That's how my wounding manifested. I should also mention that at the time I had been on prescription meds for 10 and 20 years. So Wellbutrin for 20 years and Zoloft for 10 years. Zoloft is an SSRI, and its job, and it does its job very well, is that it helps depression, but it does not heal depression. And the way it does it, I won't explain it chemically, but the way it worked for me was to basically cut off those low points, the sad depression. But I came to learn, again, I'll touch on later, it also cut off the high points. So it basically brings you into like a mid-range of emotion and feeling, which, quote, helps you carry on your day-to-day life depression-free, or mostly depression-free. It did a great job of doing that. And I always, whenever I share, I always make sure to say, I'm not here to condemn prescription medication. Everyone must make their own decisions. They aren't inherently bad. Most things aren't inherently bad or inherently good for that matter. But the price I was paying, I started to realize in going back into therapy and through therapy and helping me see that I was very disembodied. I was really feeling, I was operating from the neck up, brain only, cognitive only. Unfortunately, I've been blessed with a pretty good brain, and it took me pretty far. But, in many cases, people would ask me, as people do, what does your gut say? What does your intuition say? And kind of the same thing. I'd be like, I don't know. Let's figure it out. Let's put it on a spreadsheet. Let's make a list of pros and cons. And there's nothing wrong with those things. Those are good tools. But for any of you listening who have very strong intuition and really rely on your gut, just imagine switching that off. And that's the switch that was off within me. And so when my therapist said, "Where do you feel it?" I literally was like, it didn't even compute. So that was one big awakening for me, just recognizing that. This is before I really even became aware of psychedelic healing and those types of treatments. And I then became good friends with a psychedelic healer, and he started to educate me on plant medicines and psychedelic healing, and I really became intrigued by ayahuasca. However, to do ayahuasca safely, as you know, Nina, you must be off. There are many safety protocols. One of the biggies is you must not be on SSRI medications, and I actually had tried at that point a couple times to titrate off of those meds, not even for ayahuasca or plant medicines, but just because I wanted to be off of them, and I started noticing some of these, how they were holding me back in certain ways, as I've shared, and I became depressed again. But this time, after doing a lot of research and guidance from my friend, I decided to take the plunge and scheduled my first ayahuasca retreat for January of 2022. So only about 13 months ago. And leading up to that ceremony, I prepped in many ways. So I titrated off the meds in a safe way. My last day was December 31st, 2021. So it was about 2 weeks before my ceremony. I prepped with a variety of health and wellness strategies like yoga, meditation, things that I actually had been doing already, but also microdosing psilocybin was helpful in that. And then also, I think just knowing that I was doing this with a purpose and with a date and really intent on seeing it through. And so that led to the first ayahuasca ceremony mid-January of 2022. And that obviously was a very huge milestone in my journey. It was a 2-day ceremony, 2-night ceremony. The morning of the first ceremony, the shaman recommended that I do combo just as a, really just as a safety measure, even though I had been off the meds. So I was fortunate enough that the shaman was also an inner child coach as well. And so before she administered the combo, she took me on an inner child journey. And at this point, I should probably just reflect back and say, one of the other prices that I paid by being on these SSRI meds was, as I mentioned, they cut off the lows. So that cuts off the day-to-day, mood, feeling down, but also crying. So I could say to you that the number of times I'd cried in the past dozen years before this journey was the number of funerals I attended. So I still, of course, felt enough at a funeral to cry, but really just had that part of me, like, as I explained, just kind of disembodied. And so I'd cried a couple times leading up to the ayahuasca ceremony. So already just being off the meds sort of opened me up. And then before the combo was administered, she took me on an inner child journey. And that just completely opened the waterworks, the floodgates. So this is before any medicine had been served. Just huge release. She took me back on an inner child journey. I should also mention that at that point I'd switched therapists to one who specialized in parts therapy, or IFS, internal family systems. So an inner child journey is it aligned up with the therapeutic approach that I'd been engaged in for the previous several months. And I remember when, after the combo ceremony was over, I said, or after the inner child journey was over, I said, oh, so that combo really works well. And she said, well, I haven't even given it to you yet. And I'm just kidding, because I knew that she hadn't, but it was like, wow, all this, I didn't know medicine yet. So then I had that, combo experience, and then that led into the ayahuasca retreat. The first night of which was completely buoyant. I've laughed a lot in my life. I love to laugh. And I've never laughed so hard in my life. And it was like, wow, because I obviously did my research and I knew how hard ayahuasca could be. And this is fun. This is awesome. Wow. But I also knew, at least anecdotally, that every night is different. The second night was the most terrifying experience of my life. I truly became convinced that I wasn't coming out of it. I guess the definition of a bad trip, stuck here forever, not coming out, lost total sense of reality. I thought I might even be having a psychotic break, which can happen if you're not properly off the SSRIs, which of course I had been, but of course all reason was thrown out the window at that point. And so what among many other learnings, was that grandmother was showing me the first night the high that had been cut off. And when I say high, I don't mean in like a recreational sense, but just kind of the upper end of that range of emotion. And then the second night, she certainly showed me the down. So basically that retreat really showed me that full range of emotion that had been so cut off the previous, 10, 20 years. So, I mean, I could pause there if you want to prompt me further, ask me questions, but that was kind of like what brought me to my first experience. And then of course it progressed from there, and many other
I do have some questions, a couple of things. I think so many people can relate to what you were describing, this disembodied experience, and to be stuck in the head and disconnected from the physical body and also from the emotional aspect, or either completely disconnect from emotions, which is kind of like an emotional shutdown that you describe, that you are not able to feel fully that full range, right? Or it can be completely losing, that a bit, people can completely shut down and not feel, any emotion as well. So, and I do believe, that depression, my mom has depression, and she got sick when I was like 14. So she has bipolar disorder, and I did like so much just research on it. And I also work with many people as my clients who had depression. And one of the things that I observed, and I would love to hear what you think about it, that it's an emotional dysregulation, and it's very much connected to anger, to suppressed anger. These people have difficulty to express anger, in any kind of way. So they just keep like swallowing it down, swallowing it down. And that anger that has no way of being released and turns against the person becomes this depression, this like feeling of powerlessness, and there's no point of doing anything, kind of way. And so I think that definitely depression particular, it's very connected to emotions. And I think that this, what you described, this type of emotional dysregulation then the medicine started to, show you and hear you that full range. So what do you think about that? And especially with the anger, do you have any experience on this?
Yeah, so what I've learned through this journey, I completely agree. Depression is based on dysregulation and a powerlessness. I won't say that I have extreme deep-seated anger, but for me, I can now see with this work and continued therapy and continued integration, because as you know, Nina, it never ends, is for me, it came from childhood trauma, what some people call lowercase t trauma or micro trauma. So when I look back at my childhood, I was lucky to have two parents who stayed together, are still together, loving parents in the mental health field. But yet, where did that trauma come from? So for me, it's been so hard to identify the source of that trauma, because I didn't have, grow up with addiction in the household or abuse, or so that's why what I said before, people would say, wow, your parents are therapists, you must be really screwed up. I'd say, no, I'm pretty freaking normal. I can now see that childhood trauma. And so for me, maybe not so much from anger, but certainly the powerlessness, and certainly stemming from not being seen, and my struggles not being seen, or at least not being, or if they were seen, not being addressed. And what made it even harder was that my parents were always there for me. So if I went to them, they would never shut me down or tell me I was stupid or deal with this yourself. Like, they were there. And I did go to them for support in certain ways, but in other ways I did not. One example being, they sent me to a very progressive private elementary school, which was very heart-centered and small classes, and we were really seen at that school, and it was in this idyllic, beautiful, I mean, it was just like a paradise for school. I didn't even know there was such a thing of hating school. I loved school. School was fun. They made it fun. And then in 7th grade, middle school, they switched me to public school, but really with no preparation. So all of a sudden, just going from this beautiful, wonderful playland, which was called school, into what felt like a prison to me from day one of 7th grade until I graduated high school. And I really, really, really struggled, not scholastically, but it felt like prison to me, counting down the minutes, counting down the days. Like, it truly felt like it would never end. Kind of like the second night of my first ayahuasca retreat. Like, I was stuck here forever. Every minute felt like an hour, every hour a day, And so I didn't ask for help. I just kind of thought that, like, at that point, oh, everyone hates school. Kind of like everyone hates the dentist. I joke with my wife, I hate the dentist. And she says, well, I hate the dentist more. I said, you can't hate the dentist more. We all hate the dentist. Nobody gets to hate it more. We all hate it. So I just kind of suffered silently, and it wasn't seen. I hold no anger or blame towards my parents. As I mentioned, fortunate that in so many ways that they are, I mean, I love them, but they didn't see it. And now as a parent, they did the best they could from where they were, and they did many amazing things with me and my siblings, and they made mistakes, just as, man, I shudder to think of the mistakes I'm making with my children, even though I'm trying to parent in the best possible way. So no anger or anything like that. But to your question, led to feelings of powerlessness and isolation. An event happened when I was about 7, where I was playing with my younger brother and sister, and my mom was on the phone talking to a friend in the other room, and I heard her say, oh, the boys love playing with my sister, they fight over her attention. And as soon as I heard her say that, even though it wasn't meant for my ears, something snapped in me that made me not want, if my mom was, even though she didn't mean to create a competition, she used that word, they compete for her attention. And I immediately to myself said, if this is a competition, I'm out. I'm not. And I pulled away, maybe not right in that very moment, but I pulled away from my siblings at a young age. And that was another thing that wasn't seen and dealt with in a way that would have healed that, led me to isolate, feel powerless. And now I can see, among many other things, led to depression. And a few things I'll share about depression. Two of them come from my father, who's a psychiatrist, and he describes depression in two ways. One is, imagine you're looking outside and you see a beautiful sunny day, but you're wearing sunglasses. And so you're seeing that it's a beautiful day out, but it's being shaded. And the other way he says that, to really put words around that metaphor, is, quote, that mood trumps cognition. So I can look around at my life and say, I have an amazing wife, amazing family, friends, and all these wonderful things. Yes, all true. But yet the mood, the depression trumps it. It wins. It wins.
I think there is a really good book, Sylvia Plath, The Glass Jar, and she had also struggled from depression or with depression, and she described it with this analogy or this metaphor that for her it was like being under a glass jar that is, you know, that type of disconnectedness and disembodied and disconnected from the feeling, you know, that you describe. And, you know, as you said, as you mentioned earlier, the medications are not healing, you know, the depression. They just make you function better in the world by taking the edges off, right? So they are not dealing with the cause, they are not healing, you know, and of course, that's why most people stay on the medication for so long. And then the other, you know, as you said, the side effects of the medication, that they disconnect you, you know, they disconnect you from yourself, from your body, from your feelings, you know, and it's you know, that has other consequences as well. So now in comparing to that, now you went for a plant medicine journey with the ayahuasca, and we always say that, you know, she helps us to see the root of the problems, and you were taken back and you were able to see the connection between a chain of events, you know, in your life, and how that led to the current challenges that you were experiencing, and hopefully, you know, how to change things and how to go about healing. So it's like 1 year now. Like, what can you say? What did change, you know, thanks to that experience?
Yeah. So coming out of that first retreat, obviously everything had changed. I'm sure you hear this a lot in your travels, and I certainly do. And I remember a friend asking me, how was it? And I said, it was the most. And she just started laughing when I said it was the most, because everyone who starts, right, it was the most amazing, you know, da, 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 da. And I came back feeling pretty amazing, you know, just overflowing with gratitude and ideas and creativity, and wanting to know more. So at that point, I had experienced the medicine and grandmother, but I didn't have a deep understanding of the, you know, a lot of the traditions and the heritage and the history. And I kind of just started devouring all, you know, that type of information, just books and podcasts, and just really wanting to like just dig in and go deeper, really go deeper. And it also started the spark of how I could start to align my career with this, you know, awakening that I was having. And so, you know, I could talk about it later, but I have a web development digital marketing agency that's 12 years old, but starting to, you know, coming out of that experience saying, well, how can I, you know, marry these two pieces of my life together in a way that feels more aligned and living my truth. And so kind of like the spark of that was ignited. And I started at that point, we were still in the COVID days. I started attending meetup groups around the country, virtual meetup groups, and just like leaning in, just like seeking community. How can I learn? How can I connect? How can I meet people that know a lot more about this than me and can give me their stories and experiences and knowledge? And so that was kind of the next, steps forward in my journey. And then about a month after that retreat, depression started coming back, just like a little bit, and then a little more. And it was very, it was sad. It was terrible. On one hand, I didn't necessarily think it was a one and done, magic, it's over. I didn't think that. But on the other hand, it was obviously very upsetting that depression was coming back. Like, here it is again. And so I started then, getting ready for the second ceremony. That was last April, and that was a three-day ceremony. What was really powerful about that one was that it was paired with breath work. So 3 nights of medicine, 3 mornings of breath work. That was my introduction to breath work, which I still do almost daily now. So that was, another modality that's just been so powerful for me. Breath work, as just amazingly powerful. And what obviously so much came out of all of these, but what came out of that, and actually the 3 nights of medicine for me didn't reveal a lot in the experience. There wasn't very much laughter like the first one. It was sad, and I really cried. I mean, I was the cry guy in the room, which is fine. It happened to be all men, just coincidentally, and the first one was all women, coincidentally. So that was very different, and everything was different. The shaman was different, and the setting was different, and it was. But I wasn't getting a lot of downloads in the experience. It was just like pure, like just emotion, like crying hysterically, completely uncontrollably, almost like a baby. When you see a baby that just, can't even hold it together. And that was the feeling. And the shaman there so wisely helped me see, which I kind of knew from the first experience and learning more, but he helped me really solidify the notion that it's not so much about what's happening in the journey, although of course that can be very powerful and mind-opening, but the medicine is working, it's doing what it's doing, and trust. That's really one of the big pieces that came out of that second ceremony. Trust and surrender. And obviously the notion of surrender I was familiar with, but just trust. The medicine is working, and it will reveal itself, or that your learnings and downloads will reveal themselves in the coming days, weeks, and they definitely did. It was actually not until the third breathwork session, so that was really the last like big event of that retreat, where I realized, it just kind of came to me, a fear of feeling trapped, because I certainly in that retreat in many cases felt trapped. I never felt like it wasn't going to end like the first one, but the reason where I felt trapped was I was suffering so much in the journey and so much emotion. I said, I can't do this anymore. Maybe this plant medicine stuff's not for me. Who needs this? But then I said, but wait a minute, if I don't do this, I have depression. Holy crap. Those are like 2 things that I don't want. I mean, that's what I was feeling just in the experience. Obviously, I wouldn't be sitting here if I stuck with that feeling, but that was trapped. It was like door A, depression, door B, this suffering that I'm feeling right here in this moment. But even when that was happening, I didn't get it until, like I said, that last breathwork session of the last day. And then, of course, so much more continued to unfold. And and then I came back from that, and that's where I learned about, then at that point, the Natural Medicine Health Act in Colorado that I started to become involved in. But that's like sort of the next chapter. I didn't know if you wanted to reflect or
Yeah,
anything.
thank you. That's amazing. Like, thank you for, sharing so honestly about your experience. And I think this is very common that happens to people. We call this the ayahuasca afterglow, like 4 to 6 weeks. Addictions, medications, chronic conditions normally alleviate in the first few weeks for most of the people, and they are like, oh my God, it's miracle, it's gone. It's like, oh, like, and then it creeps back as you were describing. And I think there is several reasons for that, but I think one of the reasons for it is that the medicine shows you that this is how it feels and this is who you are without that, so you can remember that powerful feeling that you haven't felt for how long, for 20 years, or maybe never in this way, that feeling after your first ceremony, when you didn't have that shut down, and when you had this full range of feeling and experiencing, right? So I think it serves as a remembering, as an anchor for us to really remember physically, somatically, emotionally, mentally, on every level. This is how it feels when I'm in my center, in my alignment, in my, without this limitation, without this condition and stuff like that. And then, as it starts creeping back, then again the contrast will be very strong, as you mentioned. It's a very strong contrast. So your motivation is to find a way to get out of that again and permanently resolve it, will increase a lot after that. And I think that this is where integration comes here, and people who listen to my podcast, they know that I'm like, that's my obsession, because as you were mentioning, childhood stuff, things come up, suppressed emotions come up, emotional release happening, you are overwhelmed, memories surface, then you're starting to connect the dots and all that kind of stuff. And this is kind of uprooting the issue, takes some time. And I think that's what, after the ceremony, when people have a therapeutic container and guidance that assists them to do this type of processing, and to really reveal, because as your shaman said, the medicine keeps working. It's not that, oh, you went home from the ceremony and goodbye, everything stops. No, it keeps unfolding, right? The whole scenario, and there's layers and layers, and you can, once you get to the root, and when you find the root, that core wounding, whatever that is, and you're able to like process that and integrate that, then the consequence of that, the symptoms completely disappearing, but that can take some time, obviously, especially with things that were so ingrained and were repeated for so many years, like in your case, your system needs to rewire, your nervous system needs to rewire, all that kind of thing, which these medicines help you to do that. But as you said, it's not like, boom, magic pill, and tomorrow I'm like all perfect. So did you go back to any medication after your experience at any point? And I know that you mentioned earlier when we were talking that you were participating or planning to participate in some ketamine assisted therapy. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So I have, since I titrated off the meds for the first ceremony, I've been medication free, prescription medication free. These are all medicines, but yes, the ones that you pick up at the drugstore, I've been free of those.
That's awesome. Sorry,
So
but that's like, do you feel a relief? Do you feel proud of yourself? Do you feel more confident and empowered? I mean, that's such a huge deal, just to, for such a long time. Like, how do you feel about that?
yes, yeah, thank you. I do feel proud. And again, I have to just feel compelled to say that doesn't mean that someone listening should feel ashamed if they're on these medications, but this is my story. But yes, I'm happy that I'm off of them. Have I been tempted to go back? Yeah, there have been times I've been tempted to go back, because depression, as you pointed out, a month after each of these, and then I did a third ceremony in August, depression came back. I mean, it was almost like clockwork. Not that I was waiting for it, but it was like 30 days after, and depression came back. And so, but I have remained committed for myself to stay off the prescription meds. And I just want to reflect on one of the points you made, and then get into, kind of where I am now, and sharing some of the ketamine experience. But in terms of, feeling, quote, feeling, and the feelings and emotions that come out once you kind of take the cork off the bottle, and these, whether it's within a journey or after the journey. And, I shared that I hadn't cried except for a handful of times at funerals. And, a quick little story in there. But about 10 years ago, my kids, they were young at the time, said, "Dad, we've never seen you cry." And my wife said, "Oh, I know what makes him cry. Reading The Giving Tree by Shel Silverstein." The Giving Tree by Shel Silverstein. And I used to read that book, and I couldn't even not cry if I wanted to. And so my wife remembered that. And so the kids said, "Oh, come on, let's read The Giving Tree." We whipped out The Giving Tree. And I think they were like 8 and 5 or 10. So I don't know, they were pretty young. And so they're literally like sitting behind me, their hot breath on my neck, like waiting for Dad to cry. They didn't care about the story. And I'm turning the pages, reading it, and I would have allowed myself to cry. This is all obviously pre-medicine. I'm referring to 10 years ago, as I said. And, especially when it gets to that page where the tree is just a stump and the old man's sitting on this, oh man, I well up when I think about it right now, but the tears did not come. And so they were very disappointed. I was disappointed too. Like, that was like, holy crap, what's going on here? And so I just mentioned that, well, hey, it's kind of an amusing story, but to your point about feeling and being on this journey is not, even if you have the afterglow and you have those buoyant nights as I've had, and so many just good days, and regular days because of this, you have to be ready to feel a lot, things that you've never felt, emotions you've never felt, memories coming back. And there's a wonderful psychedelic writer named Julia Bloom. She has a newsletter called Julia's Journeys, and she had a quote in one of her newsletters called The Purpose of Healing. And she says, "Healing is not about feeling better. It's about getting better at feeling." And I think about that so much in relation to everything I'm saying, and hopefully that resonates. I didn't write it, but I think about it all the time, because it's about allowing those feelings and emotions, whatever they are, and not pushing them aside, making them go away with substances that aren't healing substances, or just trying to suppress them. And, parts therapy is all about being with your parts, right? Those parts. And so my therapist, who's wonderful, is always encouraging me to do that, and reminding me, because even though I could say it here, it's one thing to say it and then it's another thing to live it. And that was actually my intention going into my third ceremony, which is just allowing myself to be with my parts, allowing myself to give love to them and gain wisdom from them and learn from them and be with them. That's really kind of the essence of parts therapy, which aligns so well with psychedelic healing. And so, yeah, so I had that third ceremony in August, and I won't go into all the details about that. It was wonderful and amazing. I actually came into that one feeling great, but then about a month after that, so this is now like post Labor Day, September-ish, depression started coming back. And then so it was pretty bad this past, and now we're coming like almost to the present, I'm talking this past fall, so September, October, November, December. And of course, option one was go back to an ayahuasca ceremony, which I considered, and I know I will do at some point. Option two was just let's go with it, and right, like the saying, let's just get better at feeling, even though as hard as it is. And I did a lot of that for sure, and continued integration. But then I started learning about ketamine therapy. which, as you know, is not a plant medicine, but I like to think of it as, we are made of plants, and so man and women created these in a lab. So it's not a plant medicine. No, I'm not going to say that, but hey, we're human beings. We're pretty awesome. So if we can create a medicine in a lab that can provide healing, true healing, not just suppressing symptoms, but deep healing, then cool. So started researching that, and I started ketamine therapy on January 4th. So intramuscular. So go into kind of a clinical setting. So there's no ceremonies. And, I kind of brought my own ceremonial aspects into it. I mean, you can't bring in an altar and candles and chanting, but, I brought in, some things that are meaningful to me, and, ceremonialized it as best as you can in that setting. And it's the clinic I went to 6 sessions over 3 weeks, so twice a week, 3 weeks, with increasing dosages. The place I went was wonderful, passionate people, but it's very, very some similarities in that it is a psychedelic experience, but many, many differences. There's really no diet. There's no, I did my own prep, just bringing the knowledge I have of preparation and integration, but the day of, it's kind of like, yeah, just don't eat for 4 hours and show up and get your shot. I mean, it could be just like that, but I did my best to, like I said, kind of bring some of the wisdom I gained from the experience. And so, really the morning that I woke up, January 4th, I was feeling depressed, and it was also hopeful, but, I just very hopeful that it would work, quote, work. And that first session I did, the best way I can describe it, and as you know, these are very hard to describe these experiences, but it comes on very quickly in an intramuscular, 2 minutes it starts, and the whole experience is only about an hour or so, 75 minutes maybe. The way I can describe it is that once I sort of was under, I could feel the healing happening. That doesn't even begin to describe it, but that's the best way I can describe it. Like at a deep, deep level, I'm like, something like healing's happening. I'm kind of repeating myself, but like, that's how, just boom, like I'm being healed. Wow. But it's, as it's described as a dissociative medicine. So there's not a lot of even cognitive thinking that is even possible. And by the way, what I'm describing is intramuscular, heavy dose of ketamine, which is different than ketamine assisted psychotherapy, where you're taking a lower dose and able to talk. And I'm actually going to be doing that in about 2 weeks with my therapist.
So you are just like in a very deep state of like relaxation or meditation or something like that.
It's very, very deep, dissociative. I mean, it's very meditative. It's very dreamlike. So when you're coming out of it, you're kind of like reflecting on it, and then kind of like a dream, even like 1, 2, 3 hours later, it's already starting to fade away. There's one school of thought is that it kind of doesn't matter what you're thinking about doing. It's just like literally a very physiological thing that's happening by creating new neural pathways and building dendrite, like just very like physiological. Of course, more of the opinion as the other school of thought that it's both. It's physiological, but it's also what you bring into it and your intention and the integration coming out of it. That resonates more with me because I think that's more aligned with plant medicine than psychedelic healing in general. But
so what happened, when you got like after the first day, like did you feel any different?
Yeah, I felt difference immediately, like immediately. That afterglow that we have with plant medicine, psychedelic medicines, I certainly felt. But then 2 days later, I was back for number 2, and then it's twice a week for 3 weeks. And that the mood improvement, which is, I'd say 99 to 100% from a depression perspective, has sustained. And then after your induction series, which is what this 3 week period is called, then you can go as often as every 3 weeks for a booster. So then I went back 3 weeks later for a booster. And then actually this Friday, I have another booster. And then you can continue that as long as you wish. And then I'm also now going to layer in ketamine assisted psychotherapy. That's where you get a lozenge prescribed, yes, at a drugstore, a lower dose, but I can do that with my therapist, because when you're in the intramuscular piece, you're not really even able to verbalize. It's not a relational dialogue type of experience.
Oh, interesting. So basically, the ketamine prevented you to kind of fall back that deeply, but you have to kind of maintain it because you feel that it's also kind of fading, same way as the ayahuasca was, or do you feel that it's more sustaining, or what's your experience?
Sure. So clearly, as I've, my experience is relatively new. We're here in March, so it's only been 2 months. So I haven't felt depression coming back since I started 2 months ago. These booster shots are totally optional, and it's by no means that you must go every 3 weeks for the rest of your life, because I've met people who go less and less frequently and have stopped altogether. So I think it's free. It's very personal based on your experience, but it's there, and it's much more accessible in that there's no dieta, there's no preparation, and by no means am I saying that makes it better or worse than it's just different and more accessible on that side. On the other side, which is a whole totally different discussion, it's the accessibility is very challenging because it happens to be incredibly expensive, and that gets into equity and insurance and all that, but
No, I just want to point out, just for the listeners, that you were on those medication, the Xanax and Wellbutrin, was it, right?
Zoloft,
So,
yeah. Yeah.
So for 20 and 10 years, so 1 decade and 2 decades, and you had, not that you didn't get better, but in a way you got worse, because you were like, I don't want to take this anymore, I don't want to do this anymore, right? So, and then 3 ayahuasca ceremony and 3 weeks of ketamine helped you to fully come off of all of those meds and have, the symptoms at bay, so you feel completely different. So I just want this information for people to sink in, because this is what we are talking about, here, that unfortunately allopathic medicine, in terms of, chronic disease and mental emotional problems, is very, very ineffective, as you can see, and not even talking about the side effects of that medications, and what was that, like, these have serious side effects. So that's just such a huge difference. That's just such a huge difference, right? If we put this on one side, 20 years of meds did nothing. And then, a couple of sessions just like suddenly, dramatically shifted the way you feel, the way you approach this whole thing, and set you on a good path of healing. So this is amazing. Like well done. Thank you for sharing your experience.
Yes, yeah, thank you for recognizing it and calling it out, because that's certainly been the case. Complete life-changing
And
experience.
also that you've been also in therapy most of your life,
Right.
So, and again, psychotherapy, counseling, of course, has many useful, helpful aspects, but yeah, if only doing that is probably not going to be enough, when we're dealing with trauma, and unconscious things that you are not aware. You cannot talk about stuff you are not aware of. You have no idea, you cannot talk about it. And a big part of the stuff is the unconscious, right? Which is the bigger part, what we are not aware of. So this is just so exciting. And I assume that, but correct me if I'm wrong, that all this, your personal experience also made you passionate about be part of this new legislation that is happening in your state. You want to tell us about that a little bit?
Sure. Yes. So last I became aware of the Natural Medicine Health Act, or Proposition 122, last summer. And I went to the site and they said, sign up if you want to help. And I did, and I kind of forgot about it. And then one day they said, hey, I got an email. It was like 1:00. And they said, we just got enough signatures to be on the bill, to actually be voted on. We're celebrating tonight in Denver at 5:00. And it was about 2:00. And I live in Boulder, and I had a really busy day, and I was going out of town. I said, I got to be there. And I just jetted down there. And that really was the starting point of my diving into doing whatever I could do. So I became what's called an ambassador for Prop 122. So a lot of get out the vote acts and just talking to folks and going to events. And we had a fundraiser at our house where I shared my story. It was the first time I had shared my story publicly. And that also just revealed to me how healing it is to share my story, publicly. And of course, I talk about it in therapy and storytelling and the power of storytelling. So, I'll get back to the legislation, but just in terms of my own personal healing, and I think, in this community, we kind of know that term storytelling and how powerful it is. And then I became aware of a nonprofit organization in Canada called Nikeon, NIKEAN.org. And anyone who wants to share their story, go right there. It's really, or if you just want to see dozens or even hundreds of stories, like Rick Doblin shares his story on that. And so they do a really wonderful job, just as you're doing today, Nina, just, prompting and reflecting, and then they publish these stories. And so that's one kind of cool piece that came out of my work on the bill, just for my own healing. But back to the legislation, it passed 53 to 47% in Colorado, which is a huge margin versus the 50.5, 49.5, razor thin margins that we see within our polarized society. 190,000 more yes votes than no. And I'll give you the highlights of the bill. It really was, I had nothing to do with drafting it. So kudos to those who did, because they really, really thought through as much as they could, because it's impossible to foresee everything and unintended consequences. But one thing that they did was looked at what the state of Oregon did. So they passed similar legislation 2 years ago and looked at what, some of the goods and bads. And guess what? We'll have some bads in ours as well. Interestingly, in the psychedelic community, there was a faction of people who voted no. People just like you and me who are passionate about psychedelic healing, who were very much against this bill. So it just shows that no matter what, there could always be controversy, but the bill did pass. And the bill really takes into account not just legalization, but things like equity and respect for indigenous people and tribes. So getting a lot of input from that community. And so anyway, the highlights of the bill are that as of when the governor signed it, I think that was end of December, psilocybin became decriminalized, legalized, and there is some nuance there for personal use. So that means you can grow, cultivate, transport, and gift psilocybin and use psilocybin. That's completely legal. This bill does not at all include the buying and selling of medicines. This is not, as some people say, cannabis 2.0. There won't be dispensaries and things like that. So there's no commerce around the buying and selling of medicines. So that's on the personal use side, as it's called. And then there will be the regulated use side, which will be governance, regulations, guardrails around the legal provision of healers serving medicine for psilocybin journeys. There will be
So that's the therapeutic use, right? So the therapeutic use
right.
will be regulated. And who is doing this regulation? Is it who is deciding what a therapeutic container should be, or these kind of things?
Right. So the first major milestone was the Governor Jared Polis, appointing the Natural Medicine Health Board, which is 15 people of different backgrounds, law, indigenous, medical, etc. So that's been appointed. And now they have about 16 months based on the bill to now create the regulation around that. Oregon is 2 years ahead of us, so they've now done that. And I can't speak as closely to what they've done because I'm just not as close to it. But so the answer to a lot of the questions that come up around this are, well, we don't know yet. Some of it's baked into the bill, some of it is not. Some of it's, hey, to be determined.
So my question is, because I'm not sure if I even understand it correctly. So once it's legalized for, now we talk about the therapeutic use, right? Then there will be some rules how you can use it in what way, right? Some kind of, and it will mean that if you don't use that way, that would be illegal probably, right? While if you decriminalize it, that means that there is no regulation in terms of how you can use it in a therapeutic form. So I think, like, that a lot of people, as you said, that even some therapists or people who work in the psychedelic space, they are not really for the legislation because they think that the plant should be just decriminalized, which it shouldn't have been criminalized. The first place is just ridiculous, that you ban a plant and the use of the plant, and then you create a protocol how you can use that plant, and you make all the other things illegal. Like, if a indigenous person not follows that protocol, that will be illegal to do it. You know what I mean? So what is your perspective on that?
Yeah, so everything you said is very valid. And even though I mentioned there's a faction of folks, which is to your point, and they're more on the decriminalization side, that there should not be regulations around this. I respect their opinion. But to answer your question more succinctly, so first of all, I'll just lay out a little bit more detail about the bill itself and then circle back to your question. So for example, one of the provisions is that no individual or company or entity can own more than 5 treatment centers. And of course, what is a treatment center and how does that operate? Well, is to be determined. There will be provisions for, the easiest path will be people who already have like therapy degrees, but then there are plenty of folks, as you know, who practice, quote, underground. Of course, they should have never been made to be underground, but they've had to operate underground. And now some of them are saying, well, hey, I've been doing this work for 20 years. Now you're telling me I have to jump through these hoops. And so I understand that frustration. There will be provisions for folks with that type of experience to have an easier path, and they won't have to go back to school and get a psychotherapy degree. There will be a path for them to, reach the status of being able to serve medicine. One thing that's very different about Colorado versus Oregon is that there are provisions for ceremonial settings, outdoor settings, group settings. So settings that are more aligned with, the types of journeys that you and I are used to having. Whereas in Oregon, it's very clinical based. And whenever I talk about Oregon, it's with the utmost of respect because they were the first. So it's not like, hey, they messed up. Like they got their bill passed. Now we got our bill passed. It's not perfect. And so what's that?
They are the pioneers.
That's right. And so the next state will improve on Colorado. So it's respect all around. But yes, there is that faction who have those objections, of course, as being pro Prop 122. My personal feeling is we had to deal with what we had. Yes, these medicines never should have been criminalized, but we got this bill passed. And now that, to me, that's a good thing. And we can roll it out. We can adjust, we can iterate, and hopefully provide as much, respect for indigenous people, for people who've been operating, quote, underground. And the goal, right, is to heal. How can we get these medicines out in a way that can heal? And the provision, for example, that says no more than 5 treatment centers prevents having like a Walmart of right, treatment centers. And that's what we saw in cannabis, big companies coming in and buying up dozens of dispensaries and that type of thing.
So if people are interested in, becoming part of their own state's legislation or part of that whole process, or provide, support for that, or, whatever way they can do that, like what can people do? They can go to their own representatives, or how does this start,
Yeah. So as I mentioned, like there are, I think 10 or 11 other states right now that have legislation in the works. And I won't claim to be an expert in other states, or I'm not even an expert in Colorado, though I'm, fairly well versed in Colorado. Yeah, reach out to your representatives, do your research. It won't be that hard to find because this is ongoing legislation. There's a good online publication called Marijuana Moment. So it has marijuana in the name, but they cover a lot of psychedelic. That's a good newsletter, like just lots of good updates on what's happening. Get on their newsletter. That's a good resource. And yeah, I mean, I don't have any like magic words, but just lean in, like research, find out what's going on in your state. There are organizations that are going to be behind this. I found, and support it however you can, right?
Yeah, join the forces that are already marching into this.
That's right. Yeah, that's exactly it.
And also, as you mentioned at the beginning of our talk, you have a company and you are focusing on marketing and digital web develop. What is that exactly?
Yeah, sure. So my company is called Gloss, and we've been in operation for 12 years. And we do web development, web design, e-commerce development, and a variety of digital marketing services like search engine optimization and content marketing, social media marketing, and anything to get eyeballs on your brand. So we've been doing that for a long time. And part of my journey was getting back to the beginning, definition of insanity, even though, I'm proud of my company and I can say that I like it, but it just never felt like it was really igniting my passion. And so my journey helped me realize that, but now bring, my area of expertise and marry that with wanting to serve. I mean, that's just a term that I say so much. We all say, I want to serve, I want to help, I want to heal. Coming out of one of the ketamine sessions, it was just like hit me like a ton of bricks. Like, man, we gotta do whatever we can to get education, raise awareness, funding, talk about equity. How do we make sure that whatever your socioeconomic status is, you have access to these medicines, whatever that looks like, especially in the absence of being covered by insurance, because these are still federally illegal, just like cannabis is federally illegal. So, aligned with what I'm doing for my business, I'm on the leadership team of the Colorado Psychedelic Society. So that's a nonprofit, and these societies exist all over the world. I'm a co-founder and on the board of directors for the Psychedelic Business Association. And I'd love to give the website address, but we're building the website now and don't have the address, but that should be up soon. And that will be similar to like a chamber of commerce for psychedelic practitioners and businesses. The co-founders are in Oregon, providing things or either resources or direct access to things like insurance. I don't mean health insurance, but things like that.
I'm definitely gonna give all of these websites, in the description of the podcast. And
cool.
If for the listeners, if you need any marketing, web design, branding, all that kind of stuff, like Greg loves to work with people who are, into plant medicine, so we can mix, the two things together. And I've seen some of his work, and he's very excellent and has a great team. So you can check out his work. We're gonna put your website and everything, and I think this is great because definitely a lot of us are lacking on that, in this field.
Yes, I appreciate that so much. And whatever we can do to serve, and then whether it's solo practitioners in this space or more established businesses, clinics, even public companies, we work with a few of those. So whatever we can do to serve, and help raise awareness and heal. That's what I'm passionate about.
Thank you so much for coming today and sharing your journey and sharing, all these wonderful things, that you experienced recently. And for all the listeners, keep tuned in for our next episode. And also, we're gonna do a workshop in May in connection with the plantmedicinepath.com about emotional healing and emotional release. So it's a must for anybody who suffers from emotional dysregulation, suppressed emotions, disconnect, from emotions. That's what we're gonna discover, how to break through that and how to process emotions in a healthy way. And that will start in May. So if you go to the plantmedicinepath.com and the workshops, then you will see there the art of emotional integration. And also, if you're interested in ayahuasca assisted therapy, then you can contact me. And if you want to be on the podcast, also contact me. I'm also looking for amazing and interesting people. And again, thank you, Greg, for coming. Is there anything that you would like to shout out and share with the world before you wrap it up for today?
Yeah, first of all, thank you. This has been an absolute pleasure. You've been so easy to talk to and easy to share with. So thank you so much for that. I'll give one more shout out to a nonprofit that's made a huge difference in my life, and it's called Empathic Health. So it's empathic.health. So it's a nonprofit psychedelic healing community that's been a huge part in my integration, provides support, community integration, resources, all kinds of, friendships, love. It's awesome. So if you're cool with that, would love to have that be a shout out. It's here to serve. So that's what we're all here to do.
Thank you, Greg, and blessings on your path. And I'm sure that we're going to talk more, in the future. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much.